is, of course, vitally important for all of us. As the battle to liberate Aleppo moves into even more bloody phases, the question that is in the minds of many as this bitter opposition by the terrorist army, which has engulfed at least half of Syria's territory, as the resistance to the liberating armies of Syria and its allies is obviously on the TV a very, very significant military resistance. The question of where these terrorists got their weapons from becomes a very, very big question indeed. After all, these weapons are small arms, medium and heavy weaponry. The ammunition appears to be completely unlimited. So where did they get it all from? They stole it from the Iraqi army. They received it in mistaken parachute drops of weapons from the United States and its allies. But that doesn't account for weaponry on this scale. So who, where are these terrorists getting these weapons from? It's a very, very big and very important question. There's some of them being dropped there. Well, for a very long time, the border with Turkey was entirely open. And the satrapies in the Persian Gulf, acting under orders from the owners of these satrapies, the United States and other Western countries, were shipping these weapons across the Turkish border. As a result of United States complicity in the attempted coup to overthrow the government in Turkey, a new era may have opened. Erdogan, the president of Turkey, just visited Russia and met with President Putin, and a new era appears now to be underway. The Turkish border, just this day, was sealed in several important places, and it would appear that no more weapons will cross the Turkish border. Moreover, the president of Turkey has announced that he is seeking Russian cooperation for joint military activities against the terrorist armies of Al-Qaeda and ISIS and their affiliates, who go by a myriad of names, but who are all the same: head-cutting, throat-cutting, heart-eating savages, each and every one. So these are the two questions veiled. And where do these Syrian terrorists, who are fighting so bitterly in the streets of the great and ancient city of Aleppo and elsewhere, where do they get their weapons from? I don't know about you, but as I watch this epic battle to liberate Aleppo go on, I have to conclude that the Syrian terrorists must be being supplied by a state or states. There is no private market in weapons that could possibly supply the kind of weaponry and the scale of that weaponry that is on display. Let's hear what Hans in Germany thinks. Hans, welcome.
Hello, good evening, George. Thank you for having me on The Voice.
Always a welcome, sir. Go ahead.
Now, to the first question, I'm not so familiar with the internal British politics.
No, of course.
Frankly to say, I mean, I watch sometimes when I see Jeremy Corbyn, he is, he gives the impression he is a straightforward, honest man. You know?
He is a good and honest man. That's why they hate him.
Yeah, he's not so slimy like the other hypocrites.
He's the antithesis of the slimy hypocrite politician that we've become used to in Britain.
Yeah. No, not only in Britain.
Quite so.
Yeah.
Quite so.
Now, the second question. George, the question is important, but the war is going on in Syria now for 5 years. But, one look on the map shows who has access to Syria. First, Turkey. Second, Jordan. Third, Lebanon. Fourth, Israel through Golan Heights.
And fifth, Iraq.
And Iraq as well, yes, correct. But from there, I think in the beginning, yes, when it all started with ISIL, through these...
yes, ISIS came from Al-Qaeda in Iraq.
Yes. So Lebanon weapon will not go through there, from there.
No,
from Jordan,
because
from
the
Jordan,
Lebanese resistance is a barrier to that.
Yes, but the main weapon supply came through Turkey. We know this, and it was documented, when these prosecutors ordered to open the trucks, and it came out, it was the Turkish Secret Service. So, but who is behind this Secret Service is, of course, the government in Ankara, and I believe also the CIA, America, and others. The financial
NATO
comes. NATO, maybe, yes, because we must not forget the aim. The aim is to topple Assad. That was, remember when Hillary Clinton in Riyadh with the former Saudi foreign minister, when she said, when he asked her, she asked him, don't you think it's a good idea if we support the rebels they call them rebels, they are criminals. If we support the rebels in Syria? And the answer was, I think it is an excellent idea. And after this, several times on TV, you could see Hillary Clinton, Assad must go, she shouted out. So for me, it's clear. The main supply came through Turkey. Now, with a new situation with Putin and Erdogan, there might be a change. So then, to my opinion, then it might go through Jordan, yeah? And it is clear, this war could have been ended already 4 or 5 years ago. This is not an army fighting there. They are guerrilleros, they are not even combatants according to international law. They are criminals. If you don't supply weapons, after 4, 5, 6 weeks, the whole thing is finished. And there were signs that even America, I don't know if it's true, the Iraqi TV reported it, that they were supplied partly by air from American planes.
Yeah, we showed some footage of it earlier on, yeah.
Yes.
They said it was all a mistake.
Yeah, so it's such a dirty... this is like every war. It is awful.
Is it the case in Germany, as it is the case apparently here, that the fact that we are now on the same side as Al-Qaeda and ISIS in the war in Syria, does that cause any political waves? I've given up on the United States. It's only not that long ago that on 9/11 they murdered 3,000 American citizens, and now the American government is working with them, and yet nobody seems to do or say very much about that. Ditto here, maybe to a slightly lesser extent. Is it even an issue in Germany?
It partly is, but the majority of the media, they spread out disinformation, or they just ignore it, like the war in Yemen, when Saudi daily bombs civilians, hospitals, everything. It is, unfortunately, the media in Germany, they are not reporting properly.
Is there the same Russophobia in Germany as there is here? You see, it's mixed up now. The hatred of Assad is compounded by the hatred of Putin, the hatred of Russia. It's like going back to the Cold War days here.
Yeah, it is a very tension situation. Also in Germany, of course, it is reported. Also, I mean, we got more than 1 million refugees from Syria mainly, also from Iraq, partly from North Africa, from other African parts, but the majority come from Syria, and it is almost impossible to give them shelter quickly and everything. And now, of course, now it comes out that amongst these refugees you find ISIL people. Or we had several attacks now on police and you know, in Munich and Würzburg and other places. So I think the population, I mean, still there is a welcome atmosphere for these people, because, I mean, Germany has long experience with refugees from the east, from the eastern territories, when they were kicked out of what is today Poland, Yugoslavia, and Czechoslovakia. So the Germans have a more understanding for refugees, no matter if it's Muslim or not. No, but if this continues with this undermining, that then the people, like you can imagine, they say, most of them, they are terrorists, which is, of course, not true.
Well, of course, and what puzzles me is that the conclusion the public doesn't reach is, why have we helped to cause all this chaos in Syria and the flight of all these refugees? Hans, thanks for the call, my friend. I must press on. Marcus Papadopoulos is editor of Politics First magazine and an excellent guest. I'm glad to welcome him back. Marcus, you know about the arms trade, particularly in the Balkans, in the East and Central Europe. The scale of the weaponry that the terrorist army in Syria are using is so vast, it must be state-backed, no?
Good evening, George, and thank you ever so much for having me back on.
Welcome.
Yes, my observation regarding this revelation about weapons from the Balkans going to the terrorists in Syria, and let's call them terrorists, which they are. Let's not romanticize them as rebels, how Western journalists and Western politicians are.
Exactly.
These people are terrorists. But my observation is that it demonstrates how America's client states in Eastern Europe, from Croatia to Serbia and so forth, and I say Serbia with great sadness, but Serbia has become a client state of America. But the Americans are using their client states in Eastern Europe to indirectly fight their dirty wars.
Ukraine also is a big source of weapons, isn't it?
Yes, it certainly is. And the Americans, without a doubt, have orchestrated what is happening in Syria. Without American consent, Turkey, Saudi Arabia and Qatar would not be doing what they're doing in Syria without the Americans having given them the green light.
That's absolutely obvious, yeah.
And the amount of weapons that have flowed in to Syria is the reason for why Syria finds itself in year 5 of a terrible conflict, and why tens of thousands of Syrians have died. And you know, Western journalists, they don't like to talk about this figure, but nearly 100,000 Syrian soldiers have perished in this war. And you know, George, in my opinion, the Syrian army is the only moderate force in Syria.
It's certainly the only legal force, and anybody that the Syrian government invites to come to their aid, these are the only legal combatants in this whole picture. Marcus, when these fanatic extremists are cutting people's heads in France, they're called what they are: terrorists, savage murderers. But when they're doing it in Syria, they're called rebels. How does that work?
Well, I mean, you know, George, that the West has a history of working with Islamic extremists when it suits them. It started in Afghanistan in the 1980s against the Soviet army. It continued in Bosnia during the civil war there. It continued into Libya, and it's continuing to Syria today. The Americans in particular, but also the British and the French, but the Americans especially, they will use repugnant groups to try and achieve geostrategic objectives. And Western media, which is very much a part of the political establishment in Washington and in London, they will disguise the true nature of these people to their domestic audiences. So like you said, when they commit heinous crimes in Paris or Brussels, they're called what they are, terrorists. But when they do the same, for example, in Syria, you don't hear about these atrocities. They're just called rebels, they're just called freedom fighters, they're whiter than white, and they're fighting against this despicable, tyrannical, genocidal...
And yet it's the same people.
And it's exactly the same people, exactly the same ideology. And you know, George, I would like to say this. There's a lot of talk at the moment in Western media about what's happening in Aleppo. Well, do you know something? I don't remember Western journalists for the last 4 years talking about how the terrorists in eastern Aleppo have been killing civilians in the government-controlled parts of Aleppo with artillery fire, with snipering, etc., etc. And, you know, the whole world should really be behind the Syrian military, the Russian military, the Iranian military, and Hezbollah in its attempt to encircle eastern Aleppo, because that part of Aleppo must be brought under control of the Syrian government, the only legitimate authority in Syria. And by doing that, that will strike a grave blow to terrorists fighting in Syria. And let's just be clear about it. The Syrian army is the heart and soul in the fight against terrorism. And should the Syrian army collapse on the battlefield to be defeated, which I don't believe it will, but if it did, then the threat posed by ISIS and other terrorist groups to Europe would increase.
Unbelievable. They would be, their black flag would be flying in Damascus, and they'd be on the Mediterranean coast. Marcus Papadopoulos, editor of Politics First magazine, thanks as always for an outstanding contribution.